This evening, I will be reviewing The Forked Tongue by Flagg. It's The Forked Tongue, a handbook for treating people badly by Flagg. You see, my light is messing up, so I hope you can see it. There it is, by Flagg. I got this book when it first came out in 2008, I think, when Flagg wrote this. And yes, and in 2008, a little young one is also into the topics that this forked tongue covers. And so I thought it would be nice to buy them a copy of the book, not thinking if it would even be online because Flagg passed away. I checked online and found The Forked Tongue, same book, revised by Flagg. If you know anything about Flagg's family, Soul Hunter probably did a wonderful thing and kept us going in the vein of Flagg, which means that this revised copy is thicker than my copy, which is fine. The revised copy, before I really get even into the book, the revised copy, there's book 1 and book 2. Book 2 is the original Forked Tongue. I haven't really gone through this book. I don't think I'm going to. There are some notes and contents in this book. I may look through it before I give it to the little prince. But I just wanted to point out that if you are going to get this book, I believe you're going to get this copy, the revised copy, which is great because it has more thoughts on it. I may just have to review this copy because this copy is very much different from this one. That being all said, let's get into it. I want to read some of the author's note. When I read a book, I read it from cover to cover. So I start there and then I read it all the way to the end. But I want to read some of the author's note, like I did with the guide to the toy bag. Let me read some of what Flagg has to say. I am not enough of a hypocrite to preach about safety. Others are better suited to it and have done so, far better than I ever could. I do not want people to play safe. I don't want to see anyone unintentionally injured. But there are shades of behavior which cannot be covered by so simple a mantra or by pretending that people don't do them. There are slogans, God help us, there are slogans. A lot of people get very caught up in these slogans, apparently confusing the slogan for the fact. We are not going to waste our time with either. In the end, slogans do not matter to this book's intended audience. So if you haven't gathered, The Forked Tongue, one I believe is a play on words, and a handbook for treating people badly. The badly part is the part that this book talks about. Like the author, sometimes people think saying these words like safe, sane, and consensual, or having a risk profile, or rat, or prick, or like these words they're not magic, right? These are words you can use when negotiating any kind of scene with anybody else. So those words aren't the magic. What you really have to deal with is the person, no matter how many times you say those words. That's why I think he calls it a mantra. He goes on to talk about that further in the author's note. It is really about the integrity of the person. So you can say safe, sane, and consensual, and risk-aware, kink, consensual, kink. You can say all of those things, but it really comes down to the integrity of the person you are dealing with. There's a chapter which I thought, when I first read this, I thought this is strange. You have a chapter of structure, and he talks about protocols, rituals, and rules. And he briefly goes through setting that up. And if you don't, maybe you might want to set that up. He talks about different tips and tricks of setting up protocol, ritual, and rules. Whether it's, and even though it's maybe, let's see, 6 pages, 10 pages, it is really good to go over that, and maybe it will give you some ideas on how this can help you in the long run. And as he says, when building anything to last, you start with the foundation, and that foundation must be sound. Again, going back to the integrity of a person. And it's not only the integrity of the person that you're setting up a scene with, it is also about your integrity. Because sometimes people's integrity is, I'm not going to say tested, but sometimes people have to, like those mantras, people say words, but when it really comes down to it, sometimes they don't follow through. And I think when we talk about treating people badly, this is on purpose, right? We both consented to this. It really is about the integrity, not only to the person being treated bad, but the person who's treating that person badly. And then the book goes into several chapters about how one can treat someone badly consensually. There is a chapter on hypno fetish. A mind is a terrible thing to waste. And if you're into hypnosis, there are tips and tricks on how to do that process of hypnotizing someone. I'm not really into that, but that's just not my thing. It may be your thing. Go for it. And I think I said this about the last book that I talked about. Why do I have books like this? I'm really into the mind fuck, humiliation, conditioning, and interrogation. Those are the other chapters after the hypno fetish. So the mind fuck chapter is really just that, fucking with somebody's mind. It gives you some tips and tricks, but it also gives you a lot of warning. And when you read this book, throughout the book, there is always some form. And when I say a warning, I'm not saying something to scare you. What I'm saying is that there's a warning that this may go terribly bad. And before it gets to terribly bad, what are we going to do? And if it does go terribly bad, what do we do? We go into it knowing all that we need to know, but to be aware that sometimes things go terribly bad. Not only can things go terribly bad when you're doing things like a mind fuck or humiliation, or if you're doing interrogation, let's say it's a level, and you will find that in this book, Flagg talks about really these things that we mess with someone. They're so very personal that you have to take the time to get to know them. You really have to have some kind of relationship with them, whether it's casual or not, because you have to use, in this book, you use the things about the person against the person. And then add a little twist on it, right? So that's something to be aware of. If something goes terribly wrong, how do we handle it? How do we deal with it? Sometimes you can't plan for something going wrong, but what do you do when something does go wrong? So when I say there's warnings in here, that's what I'm talking about. Not something to scare you, but to let you know there's a possibility of that happening. When you're dealing with the mindfuck interrogation or humiliation, I would say it's more, well, I don't want to put like levels to this shit, but there's levels to this shit, right? Doing a caning scene and making a mistake and hitting someone the wrong way is different from doing an interrogation scene and the chair falling back or whatever you have them on, depending on the scene, and them hitting their head, right? Or them splashing water everywhere and now it's all over them and they may have a reaction and everybody's freaking out. So I'm just saying there's levels to this. We have to decide how we're going to handle when things happen, when things go terribly wrong. In this book, Flagg writes about being aware of positive and negatives, motivations for doing things, yours and theirs. Be aware of knowing what the outcome or the goal of doing a thing is. How are you going to set up the scene? Who else is going to be involved, right? It may not just be you and that person. It may be that person, you and another person that you may bring in, depending on what you're doing, how to make threats and follow through, because you don't want to not follow through with a threat. Don't lie. And when I say lie, I mean a lie that you cannot follow through with. He says, I will always advise avoidance of the deliberate falsehood. Not only can you damage a relationship with essential trust, you can get caught. It's a bad moment for Oz the Great and terrible when that pesky dog runs behind the curtain. So that kind of lie is what I'm talking about, that kind of misconception, right? So you don't want that. It talks about that in the book and how to set up a scene. Because when you are dealing with a mind fuck, humiliation, you're dealing with things and touching places where a person may be triggered in a way that you were not aware of. Sometimes the person isn't aware of it, right? They may feel like they are, right? But they may not be aware that they are going to be triggered because that's the nature of triggers. We can do the best that we can when we're dealing in this kind of play. When you're talking about humiliation, you're really touching on things like in the last book, when we were talking about race play and those kinds of things, they're very close. They're very prickly, right? And so when you're talking about humiliation, you have to be very aware of how far to go. And not only for the bottom, but sometimes for yourself. And again, are you going to add other people into the scene? That has to be negotiated. The other topic in here is when we talk about humiliation, let me just say this. Because I think the last video I put, I love to call people names. So part of humiliation, it is sometimes about putting them in certain situations where it can be very embarrassing, very humiliating. It's so funny. You know, you may say things that might be like the person may be a bit conservative, and you may make them say things that would make them blush, but make them feel a certain kind of way. When you're talking about, for instance, I don't really think I want to give that away, but when you're talking about humiliation, you may want to pay attention to the way folks behave around other people. So you're going to use those, and you may have to bring other people into it, depending, to get the desired result that you want to get out of that person. You may have somebody having a conversation in your property, or whoever you're having a scene with. You may want to take something that you know about them and bring it to the forefront around people who may not know about that. And by people who may not know about it, I'm talking about trusted people. Sometimes not everybody knows everything about you. So there's like name calling, as he says here, having people lick your boots, and people can kind of be into that, right? But depending on the situation, that could be kind of humiliating. And these things like light, right? Being used as a footstool. Um, um, Sometimes people are like, oh, that's so hot. I would love to do that. Really, would you? Really? When people are finding out things about you, which you may think is a fantasy, and then they're bringing it to reality. Sometimes the fantasy doesn't match up to the reality. It could be kind of humiliating, being called or being treated like an animal. I'm not talking about puppy play and the cute little puppy play. I mean, really being treated like an animal, to eat out of a bowl and shitting over there on a wee wee pad or some shit like that. You know, overall, this book I found gave me a lot of ideas. I haven't read it in a long time, but it's really good going back and reading it and giving me some ideas. I remember, I think the reason why I read this once or twice and hadn't picked it up again is because I had the pleasure of knowing Flagg and talking to Flagg. I wouldn't say he mentored me, but it was great having conversations. I would say that he mentored me in a way, just through conversations, nothing. formal. I got the opportunity to talk with Flagg, hear some of his ideas, bounce off some ideas, and be pushed to think differently about my sadism and how I go about expressing that with people and talking about it, and hopefully finding someone who is like my match. So difficult. But like I said, it is a good book. There is the revised version. If you get it, know that this is not a book that you can pick up and read and say, I'm going to do this scene tomorrow. That's not this kind of book. You have to really have a certain kind of skill, do a lot of observing. And even though I said do a lot of talking, sometimes when you're doing a scene, depending on what you're doing, less is more. Sometimes you're not talking. And that adds to what you may be trying to set up. So with that, I think I've talked enough. I enjoyed it. I'm going to read it again. I just skimmed it to do this review. I don't know if I'm going to review or come back and talk about the revised version of The Forked Tongue. A Handbook for Treating People Badly by Flagg. Flagg's catchword was no apologies. Because if you're going to do something, then do it. I would love to hear what books you read in the comments. If there's a favorite book, if you're going to pick up The Forked Tongue, if you do, you got to be kind of careful about what you're saying on YouTube. But if you do this kind of scenes or play, is your favorite? I would love to hear about it. Maybe one day soon, the Leather Goddesses will bring me someone that I can use my forked tongue on. And by that, I mean do a scene. I also picked up Leather Mentorship by Tobias Perry. I'm sorry, J. Tobias Perry. I haven't read it yet. It just came in today. I may do a review or talk about this book as I just talked about mentorship and Flagg. Yeah, we'll see. Until next time, if you like these kinds of videos, share it, give it a thumbs up. If you're new here, welcome. If you're not new here, welcome back. I am Sir Raven, the CEO of BLX. As I keep saying, on this channel, I do book reviews, BLX does conversations, we do wellness through art and food, because food could be wellness as well. Finance, we believe that, again, the royal we, I believe that leather is not just for skinny, cis white guys or girls. That leather, kink, and BDSM can be for everyone to enjoy in their sexual liberation, their financial liberation, their mental health in their liberation. And we do that one video, one conversation at a time. I hope you enjoy what I've been putting down. If you do, give it a thumbs up. And I hope to speak to you again soon. Bye.